and Australian leading buyers agent. So my name is Thomas Mifsud. I'm the founder of Australian Leading Buyers Agents, um, a solution to all property investors right around the world when they decide to embark on their real estate journey by supporting and leveraging Australia's best buyers agents right around the country. We're joined by two of those partners today, being Luke Asagel from Parlay Property and Tristan Larkham from Tommy Buyers Agents. And we're also joined by Sam Power, who works and represents the Low Market Razor team, a top 10 national low market branded franchise brokerage in Australia. So collectively, there's over 50 years of property and finance expertise, and it's very timely and also strategic that we provide this environment and conversation in the back of the first RBA cut or interest rate cut for a couple of years now. And it's been very topical in the political landscape, but more importantly, for families and mortgage holders and those who are looking to get into the market. And we're here to provide you with insights, expert offerings, and an opportunity to ask some questions to navigate your property journey. So what you can expect tonight, we've got a jam-packed agenda, and we're not going to muck around. We're going to get straight into an RBA update and hear from Sam as our trusted finance partner to talk all things RBA interest rates. What does it mean for you or us as investors? And then we're going to navigate from there and get a property update from Luke, what he's seeing through the lens of property investors nationally and where that means for his particular clients and those in the call where they could be investing nationally. But then we're going to transition to Tristan, who'll talk about Victoria, Melbourne. It's a very topical state, both for owner-occupiers and investors, and what that means for those looking to get into the market. And more importantly, and this is what we're really proud of talking about this evening, we spent a lot of time talking about this, is it's all good and well to talk about the type of properties that can be acquired for people, but really at the end of the day, it's about what is the right strategy based on my circumstance, and everyone has a very different circumstance. And through the experts of a broker and leading buyers agents, understanding what those strategies can look like to ultimately get the right asset. So jam-packed agenda. You're going to hear from the experts. If you have questions, please register them in the chat. We're going to allow for plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and you're going to find that this will be a quite engaging conversation. So we do invite people to join in throughout the conversation. So without further ado, introduce Sam. Over to you, Sam. It'd be great to get your insights on the back of yesterday's RBA announcement and get your insights as to what that means for those in the call and property investors around the country.
No, thank you very much, Tom. Really appreciate it. Yeah, first cut since November 2020. I don't think it comes as a complete surprise as the market was heavily betting on it. And we saw that in a lot of the pricing behaviors with banks, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well. But first cab off the rank is, what does it mean for you? You might be an existing mortgage holder, or you might be looking to get into the market, and it's done different things. So for someone looking to get into the market, for an owner occupier, we're seeing borrowing capacity almost immediately jump by about $15,000 to $20,000, which is fantastic, particularly when a common complaint, and I'm sure it's the same with the buyers advocates, is that clients will be going and looking at properties and just missing out on auctions by 10, 15,000. Even if it's listed within their budget, it still seems to go just a bit over, or they're beaten at the punch. So that should hopefully enable the people who are prepared to be able to take that little step further to secure the properties they want. But also what it's done for existing mortgage holders is, generally speaking, reduce the repayments by about $104 per loan. So that's based off around about a $640,000 loan at a 6.3% interest rate over a 30-year term. But generally speaking, if you've got a mortgage, it will be cheaper. And we've seen the banks be extremely aggressive with passing this rate cut on, at least by way of announcing it. So absolutely chock-a-block full of announcements, but we probably won't see those changes come through till the 28th of February or the 4th of March for a lot of different lenders on the back book. So normally when rates go up, they pass it the very next day, but unfortunately when rates come down, they take just a little bit longer to ease us into a nice rate cut. But that's sort of the first hit of action from the RBA in a while. And I think it's safe to say they were quick to pour a bit of cool water on the expectations for the rest of the year as well. You've got to remember that there's two mandates for the RBA. It's not just managing inflation, it's also the employment market. And unemployment is sitting really strongly at about 4%, and underemployment is also quite low. So they're happy with that. And inflation's come down from a peak of the 6.8% it was, or in recent times, to be within target, which has allowed them to put forward this cut. But just based on the language they're using, and I'd say maybe lessons learned over the last 4 years in particular, they'll be a lot more hesitant to announce more rate cuts and push it down quicker. It'll be a bit of a let's give them a little bit and we'll see how the market changes and adapts, and then we'll like to do more. Um, but that's sort of the initial hit on it. Um, for what banks are doing and what they're predicting, the best leading indicator for what banks think is going to happen is their fixed rate behavior. And over the past 2 months, we've seen banks be extremely aggressive on their fixed rates, particularly on the 1 and 2 years. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea to go and fix in your rate, because typically the banks will win on their margin position on a fixed rate loan, but we're seeing them as low as 5.5% and quite commonly at 5.69. So what that means is they're factoring in further rate cuts over that year where they believe the variable rate will continue to drop below that 5.5, 5.6 mark. So that's at least another 50 to 75 basis points, with most major lenders factoring in a full percent of rate cuts over the 12 months, including what we've just seen released yesterday. So it's an exciting time. It should pump a little bit of life into the market. Whether or not the supply will be there, I'm not too sure. I'll be really keen to hear what Luke and Tristan have to say about that. But it's a really good thing for people holding existing mortgages, because it's going to provide immediate relief to cost of living for a lot of Australians. But I do also think it'll allow a lot of first home buyers that were just out of reach of getting into the market. It'll hopefully give them a little boost to get back in, and we'll see some great activity moving forward. Tom, if I would say that's probably what you've been seeing already, typically we don't see the market get a bit of life into it until about Australia Day, but for me it was picking up the first or second week of January. Is that sort of the same thing on your end?
Yeah, fairly consistent to that. Good insight. And I think naturally, when people have time to go away on holiday with their family and friends, they tend to reflect on what the year has been and then what they want to achieve, in the upcoming year. And to your point around the market, really pushing and emphasising the likelihood of a rate cut so early, I think that brought forward that sense of planning and optimism, and then a desire to actually chat. And I think it's a very good segue to Luke, Luke Assagill, who runs Parlay Property, been running his business for about 8 years and buying nationally for his clients. Luke, welcome to you. And I think maybe just picking up on that point, as Sam's mentioned, it'd be great to get some context around, the type of inquiry conversations you've been having with clients, so far this year. And then now we've had, a decision from the RBA, how that may have transitioned into some inquiry and conversation this week, and equally conversations you've had prior. And then it'd be great to get your views on what that means for investors from a national market point of view. I'm heading into the rest of the year. So welcome, Luke.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, so the start of this year, there's definitely been more inquiry from interstate investors, considering Melbourne, but also across Melbourne. We buy in Melbourne for home buyers and nationally for investors. And we've been finding all over Melbourne, opens have been, numbers have been up, inspections hasn't quite reflected in auction clearances and price growth currently, but yeah, there's a lot of agents out there who are cautiously optimistic. So going on to the Australian residential property market outlook. So for this year, we think the growth will be around 5.5 on average across Australia. The forecast, sorry, my mistake, between 1 and 4%. Last year was 5.5, and that was due to some factors that we'll go through. And to tell you the story about the national market, we really need to talk about Melbourne, which Tristan will go through in more detail later on. But for the first time in history, the rental yields are actually higher in Melbourne compared to Brisbane and Adelaide. So what that tells us is, and what's also been shown in the data, is the home buyer confidence is actually up in Melbourne compared to other states. other cities being Sydney and Brisbane because of the affordability. So when you're looking at the affordability, the income to price ratio is actually superior in Melbourne right now to Brisbane, Adelaide, and Hobart. So you have seen significant growth in Perth and Adelaide over the last couple of years. Perth, 5 years prior, didn't really do, for 10 years didn't do anything. So I was expected to grow. At its growth, it's not sustainable in the long term. That's why this year it's going to be more moderate. And the same thing of Adelaide as well. When you're looking at regional markets, we think this year between 2 and 4%, and I think they're going to grow based on housing supply constraints, which we'll go into shortly. Immigration. So with immigration, there is some categories of visas that actually require when people come to Australia to live in regional areas. So that also helps with the economy there, and then also lifestyle and affordability. There is people, are considering different lifestyles, living in a slower lifestyle in the country, especially with being able to work from home as well. So going on to the key factors influencing the market. So interest rates, Sam touched on those. I was actually thought it was going to be on hold, so I was wrong about that. But again, it's definitely giving people much more confidence, both vendors and also buyers as well. The other thing at the moment is housing supply. If you look at this graph from say 2020 to today, back in 2020, and the average cost to build a home was $375,000. Now it's at the 550. So that's really constricting the market. You're finding people are opting to buy something renovated or new. But the challenge is there's not as many new homes because there's increased costs for developers and builders to build, and that's also affecting, and that's also going to affect in rising prices as well. The other consideration is population growth. So when you look at the population growth, for us to grow as an economy and for our economy to flourish, we need immigration. We need people coming into Australia because we can't sustain ourselves just on the birth rate in Australia. And you're finding we are actually number 2 behind the UAE in actually immigration coming into Australia. And interestingly enough, between 22 and 24, there was about 11,000 millionaires moving into Australia. So the first consideration people have when they hear that is, okay, they're buying all our property, they're rising the property market. It's actually not the truth. When you look at the data, when they move in the first 2 years, about 9.4% buy new, 4.5% buy existing. So what it does is help the economy in the investor market, because these people need to come in, they contribute, but they need to rent. So if you're looking for an investment, that actually helps because then you've got higher rental yields and so forth. Considerations with the market dynamics and trends into 2025. So there is increased listings year on year from last year, Sam. So the contributor behind that is policy changes, particularly in Vic. People have been very lucky to get a lot of growth in Melbourne. Melbourne's been bad for the last 4 years, but if you look at Melbourne in the 30-year time scale, it trumps any other city. So there's been a lot of investors and homeowners have done really well with their equity position. So with the policy changes of land tax, they have chosen to sell and actually realise that gain. That's another thing, right? People are selling across Australia as well with market conditions because there's been significant growth in certain states. They're now realising that equity and buying bigger homes or investing in other areas. And then financial pressures. So the other reason is because the rates have been so high, we've got a bit of a reprieve with the drop recently, but people are selling or downsizing to a more affordable home so they can afford it. Another dynamic would be the federal election this year. Doesn't change much with a government, different politicians in play, though it does affect the psyche of the market. So there may be a temporary slowdown when they call that election. And then also we're looking that there'll be more investor activity this year, particularly if the interest rate drops, and that would also affect, help with rental yields. So more investors will be entering the market. So some strategic considerations moving forward for home buyers and investors. So for home buyers right now, I'll be saying buy when you're financially ready and emotionally ready, because there is a bit of FOMO going on in the Melbourne market because people are considering, okay, when are the rates going to drop? They've just dropped. There's a bit of hysteria where people want to buy before the market goes up. Will the market go up straight away? I don't think it will. I think it's going to take some time for that to happen. But again, if what I'll be suggesting right now, if you've got the ability you've got the right property you're looking for, I'd buy now. Investors, with regions of housing supply constrictions and rental demand, they're going to really grow. So again, when we're looking for investors, the four things we can take consideration is budget, yield. Obviously, that dictates where you can buy, but your strategy and risk profile. And I'll talk about risk profile later on in the case study.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Luke. And I think it's a good point you talk about. When we start to see the immediate rebound per se and interest, and it goes back to what Sam talked about around the language of the RBA decision. Like it's quite restrictive, the rate cut. And what people will feel in terms of savings, might not mean much to them. It might mean a lot to a lot of other people. But is it enough to actually get people, ready and excited to get back in the market? That remains to be seen. But I think it's also a reminder of why it's important to speak to the experts, understand what these changes mean to you financially. Don't make it an emotional decision. That's why we have great property experts like buyers agency yourself and Tristan, who can explain, what is actually going to mean the investment to find the right asset for you, and doing that with a broker can ensure you're making the right decision that's not driven by emotion. So, really good call out, Luke, and thank you. And yes, we will hear from you later on, and that's a good segue to Tristan from Tommy Buyers Agents here in Melbourne, Southeast specialist who supports clients in owner-occupier purchases in that area. Tristan, welcome. It'd be great to hear from you, just tailing into the Melbourne market. What are we seeing? How is it trending? It'd be great to get some insights from you around what that opportunity is for both investors and owner-occupiers and the like. So welcome.
Awesome. Well, again, firstly, thanks, Tom, and the team at Australia's leading buyers agents, as well as Sam and Luke. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all here today. So, look, mate, I think that's a pretty good way to start. In all honesty, in terms of like opportunity, I think that there is going to be a bit of opportunity here over the next sort of 24 months. Kicking off with like the key data that Luke's just touched on. So, headline is essentially that in 2024, regional Vic dropped 2.7%, while Melbourne dropped 3%. Though, as I'll show you in the next slide, I think that the key message that I want to drive home is that there's markets within markets, and definitely when we're looking at somewhere like Melbourne or Victoria as a whole, there's certainly different regions that are performing at different speeds, different levels, and with different sort of competition. So, and this is sort of the easiest way to say, an entire state of what's going on without me going into like suburb specifics, is looking at the affordable markets versus the top end. And I think this is where we've seen the greatest disparity across sort of Victoria and certainly in the metropolitan Melbourne. So what this actually looks like, so I think this graph on the left does a pretty good job of showing what the actual differences are as a whole from Victoria wide, but still from a more micro level. What we're typically seeing is that properties in the 5 mil plus space, I actually think that they're not as affected from interest rates as any other property in the market. Typically, there's a lot more cash in there, and there's a lot, the LVRs from those properties are a lot lower if there's loans at all. Also, those people in those financial positions, we tend to see that they're not in positions as often where they're forced to sell. So if they put their property on the market and they don't get the offer that they want, they just withdraw it. And what we're definitely seeing, especially over the last year, 2 years, is that there has just been less of those properties that have hit the market in general. And what that means from a median price perspective, we remember that median's just the middle number in a set of data. So that has dropped the median down quite significantly because there's just less that are transacting and less things happening at the top end of the market. Though, when some of those properties are coming online, I think that they're probably getting pretty similar results to what they're seeing from their peaks in 2021, which is against what this data and this graph's actually saying. But then if you take a little step down and we look at like the $2 to $3 million market, I think that's been hit probably the hardest, where the $2 to $3 million market has been this market where there's probably a lot of high income earners that are holding a bit more debt. And we're seeing some of them actually fall more than what that previous slide was showing, where it might actually be a bit more than 6%. It might actually be, closer to 10% over like a 12 to 18 month period. We've seen some people that have unfortunately had to sell and be in positions where they've lost $200,000 to $300,000 in a 12-month sort of cycle. But then if you look in the mid market, so I'd say that's sort of the $1 to $2 million level. That's where the greatest disparity comes between just the quality of the asset type. So the A grade properties that are in good positions in the suburb, that are well renovated, got great natural light, they tick a lot of the boxes on a client's brief. Those properties are still selling strong. So we go to auctions over the weekend, even late last year when the market was a lot weaker than what I think it is today. And those properties were still getting 4 or 5 bidders for a great property. In that same price band, however, if you were to look at properties that might be what we'd class as a B or a C grade asset, that might have some compromised qualities about them, which could be, they're on a main road, they're near a train line, or maybe they're in need of some renovations. Those properties we're seeing are struggling a lot more. And so they might have actually come back a little bit more than what, this graph is showing. But then interestingly, and I think this is probably going to be one of the key messages for Melbourne and Victoria over the next 12 to 24 months, is that the affordable market is still going quite strong. So that's been very much propped up by first home buyers, and there's been a lot less investors that are in the market operating at this level at the moment, as Luke suggested, though the first home buyers have essentially been holding on to this. And I think that what we're seeing is that as investors come back into this market, that affordable sector might be the sector that actually has a slight bit of growth, even though, and I totally agree with what Luke said, for the whole state predictions of capital growth, it's probably going to be low. But I think these affordable markets and some of these key suburbs in Victoria, definitely not all of them as a whole, are going to perform quite well. I think it is important to touch on just why Melbourne has underperformed. I think it's probably, I won't jump into this too much, but I'm sure that there's a copy of the slides that might go out to everyone to read through this. But I think from the key fundamental levels, it's one, the economy has just not performed as strong. Interesting stat from here is that 7,606 businesses closed down in Victoria during the financial year of 22 to 23, which obviously has a multitude of flow-on effects for the economy and people that are living in these markets. Land tax is obviously an issue that I'm sure a lot of people have heard about. The tenancy laws have got stricter. And at the same time that these things are happening in Victoria, Perth and Queensland are having sensational years of growth. So what we've definitely seen is that a lot of investors left Melbourne to go and pursue properties in other states. Point 4 here, I think, is a very interesting statistic that over the 12 months of June 2024, nearly 50,000 new investor loans were issued in Victoria. But despite this, the state saw 21,712 fewer rental properties, suggesting that as many as 70,000 investors may have sold during this period. So 70,000 properties from investors hit the market in Victoria. And what's that going to do? Like, the supply goes up, but also because these investors are leaving, demand goes down, which is obviously a big reason why Melbourne has done this. Carry on. This is just such a fascinating piece of information that I know that Luke touched on earlier, but I think it really needs to be sort of spelled out that when looking at Melbourne compared to Sydney, over the last 35 years, this is the cheapest that Melbourne's ever been. So this graph I find fascinating, that we're currently 40% below Sydney's median price, whereas the decade average is about 28%. And obviously you see what happened the last time we were down around these levels is that Melbourne had a big growth spurt over like a sort of 5-year period and caught up. Who knows if that's going to happen, but just from a level overall, I think Melbourne's looking pretty cheap at the moment, especially. And as I'll touch on the next slide as well, we're seeing people from other states that are coming back and starting to realize this. So just from some demand side effects here, as Luke mentioned before as well, like you'll see there's a lot of crossover between the states and the nationals, but Victoria is the state that has seen the highest number of population growth from net overseas migration. So we've got 183,000 people that came in the 12 months to March 2024, which is the biggest jump of any state. So in terms of a demand side, like these people do need to live somewhere. And you also have heard that 70,000 investors left the market in the previous years. So our rental yields are getting crunched right now. The next key piece of information is that new builds are very low. So it's the lowest annual completions in a decade. So when the government comes out and says that we've got these huge housing targets, we've actually gone the other way. But then to further extrapolate that as a problem, the construction timeframes are increasing, which I think is a very, very interesting thing to consider when you're looking at construction pipelines of an entire state, is that the average time that it takes to build a property has gone from 9 months up to 12 months, leaving COVID. So, like, the amount of pressure that that is putting on this one state that's got all of these new people coming in, there's a lot of investors that have already left, and it's now this period where rental yields are increasing, interest rates are now coming down, which I think is probably going to just be in the melting pot somewhere as well. And Melbourne is also looking the cheapest that it's been in essentially 35 years when comparing it to places like Sydney. And then what is happening, which, like, anecdotally, we're definitely seeing this over the last couple of weeks since 2025 has started, is that interstate investors are back. One of the guys on the team making an offer on a property, it was an auction campaign, but they said they were selling in 7 days because there was so much interest on the property. They called it straight away and said final open's going to be on Monday. Everyone come through for a final look. And he went and checked out that property. He was the only person there. And he's speaking to the agent. He's saying, like, what's going on? Like, I thought you said that you've got like 10 offers on this property in 7 days. He's like, yeah, we do, but they're all from Sydney and it's all sight unseen. So I think that's just an interesting take on where we're at the moment, Tom. And like, I don't know if you guys are seeing that, but that's my quick Melbourne market wrap of what's been happening in the market at the moment.
Yeah,
Really
nice.
interesting.
Go for
Oh,
it,
sorry,
Sam.
Tom.
You're
I
right,
was
mate.
going to say few really interesting points there that I think we're seeing on the client side as well, where I've had a number of international investors and also interstate has been a big, where in the previous 12 months, it was very much Victorians looking to Adelaide and beyond. And now it seems to be swinging back the other way, where I'm getting interstate clients looking to buy Victorian properties. With the population growth as well, a fact that I was actually quite surprised to hear that post-COVID, Melbourne still maintains one of the highest rates of internal migration. So not only are investors looking to cast a fishing line in, but there's more people moving to Victoria than Victorians moving out of it on a net basis, which also would add further pressure on the supply issue. And on the construction front, is that one of the leading development bodies I was at a talk at the other week, said that they're predicting over the next 2 years that construction costs will increase as much as 35%. So that's only going to put further pressure on supply, because with the Metro Rail loop, there's freight train builds going all the way up to Brisbane at a national level. This is something that affects other states, but certainly the Metro Tunnel, Anzac Station are consuming a lot of concrete and other raw materials, and a lot of the labour that takes to build houses. So I think they're going to be not able to keep up with any demand as far as building new homes, and we can approve off the plan properties all we want, but there's still a long process of council approvals and costs that are involved in that.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think it's a good segue also, maybe, Sam. So, Tristan, thank you for that, mate. And I know people have plenty of questions for you, so we'll get back to you shortly. But Sam, noting all that, and we come back to you. We've been able to get some good insights through the property lens, and I know that as I'm hearing both Tristan and Luke talk through the possibilities, I think about my own circumstance and my own ability to borrow, and how that pertains to my circumstance. There's more than one option that may be suitable for me. And we have either first home buyers in the call, we've got existing mortgage holders, or those who are self-employed. But through the lens of the broker, what are those options that you'd be ensuring that those who are motivated to get into the market are aware of as they embark on seeking finance through their broker?
Mate, absolutely. And I think this is a great point to mention that some people become obsessed with rate and fees. And of course, it's important. You don't want to have paying too much for your mortgage. And that's just a general competition rule. Um, but then when I'm talking to people and I've got investment horizons of 10, 20, 30 years, the one thing that will change over your mortgage is the interest rate, as we've just seen yesterday. So what the rates are doing now isn't too important. What's really important is being able to maximize your property outcomes through being, intelligent about your lending. And often that might mean just outsourcing the home buying to a buyer's advocate and outsourcing the lending to a broker and making sure that the accountants and everyone are teed into it. But when we talk about smart lending, it's not just I've got the lowest rate and fees and an offset account because I read The Barefoot Investor. Fair enough. That's probably a good place to start. But taking that extra step up to become even a sophisticated investor isn't difficult at all. And it can just be how you structure your debt. And when we talk about, minimizing tax as the first point, if you're a first home buyer, you go, well, my loan's not tax deductible. I'm an owner occupier. Well, yes, but when you sell your property as a primary place of residence, there's no capital gains tax. So if you're getting into the market, something we do a lot of education on is that it's often the first home, not the forever home. So having a bit of an investment lend and taking time to consult experts on what good investment opportunities are can be a reasonable consideration for first home buying. Because that way, if you're expecting decent growth and you're going, well, I'm getting this now, but in 5 years or 7 years, I want to be buying a townhouse or I want to be buying a home in a certain area. Again, you can do that in a way that'll be tax effective. And rent vesting is another way that first home buyers might not actually be getting into a PPR. But that takes me to the next point as well of avoiding having a lazy balance sheet. This is something I talk at length to new investors about, where they've bought maybe a couple of years ago, they've got a property worth $1 million and a 350K home loan against it. Well, there's about $300,000 of equity that you can easily access without incurring LMI or anything to go and buy an investment property. If you were to leverage existing assets, even if it's your owner occupied, as long as the purpose of those funds is to buy an investment property, that creates a nexus in the ATO's eyes, which means that that debt, even against an owner occupier, to buy an investment will be tax deductible as well. And that can even be achieved through utilizing redraw. So again, $1 million property, $350,000 loan, and they've got, let's just call it 350K sitting in their offset account. If that person was to take that 350K, go and buy a property at 600,000, pay the stamp duty, and get a new investment loan of 300,000, well, the repayments on their owner occupied existing loan and their rates stay the same. And the 300K debt on the new property stays the exact same as well, where you'll have investor rates, but only the investment loan would be deductible in that instance. If they were to pay down the loan and then redraw those funds and buy the investment property, their loan, their rate, and their repayment still the exact same as they were before. But suddenly they've redrawn that debt to go and buy an investment. So both of those loans suddenly become tax deductible. Now, I did calculations on the exact scenario we spoke about, and it ends up being that if you just took your cash and bought an investment, you'd have about a $3,000 tax liability. So even though you're earning extra income, after you've paid your costs, your land tax, you'd have to go and pay about 3 grand in tax against that rental income you've just earned. But if you leveraged, it's called debt recycling, and you were to pay down your loan, redraw it, and then buy it, you'd actually have a $7,000 tax deduction. So same repayments, same rates, same rental yield, but there's a $10,000 difference just in the taxes alone. That's what we talk about with smart lending, and that's how you optimize your property outcomes because that's over a yearly basis. So if you're getting, $10,000 better outcomes year on year, that can also help smooth out any risks about the property market movements and interest rates going up slightly or rental yields being a bit down, because you're saving a decent portion every year on tax that can mitigate those issues. So when you do come to a bit of a harder circumstance like we've seen, you're able to weather it until you get to now, which is, as Luke and Tristan pointed out, that we're in a situation where costs have just gone down and rental yields are going up. and capital growth is back to improving, you're not one of the people who had to sell because you've invested smart, you've leveraged the right expertise, and you've done smart lending against it, and that all benefits yourself. Last thing is of course leveraging government schemes. I spoke about that they've got certain home targets to go and build them, and that hasn't quite worked. There are some things that do work with the government, and that's just uh, mainly geared towards our first home buyers. Now, for investors, of course, there's still negative gearing in play. Yes, land tax has come into it, but again, buying different assets can have different implications with land tax as well. But what you can do as a first home buyer to overcome that and go, oh, there's some investor out there that wants this property. Well, you don't have to pay any stamp duty up to $600,000 in Victoria, and there's also concessions all the way up to 750,000 as well. There's still plenty of spots available on the home guarantee scheme, and we have access to lenders now that don't even require you to have saved the full 5% deposit genuinely. So it used to be 20%, now we're down to 5, and now I've got people that as long as they have the funds in their account for 1 day and proof of the source of those funds, they can get pre-approved to get out into the market and buy. It's a really big benefit for people who are on decent incomes but haven't got the savings to quite get them over the line yet. And basically, what that scheme does is allow them to avoid paying LMI. So if you're looking at a 650K property and you're getting a $17,000 or $22,000 stamp duty concession and you're avoiding paying $10,000 in LMI, that leaves you about $30,000 better off by leveraging the schemes than you would without them. So again, structuring your debt, figuring out how you're going to buy, and making sure you're being as tax effective or at least as um, optimizing your lending as much as you can to get the best results out of your properties will always keep you one step ahead compared to other people in the market. So, is there any, I think, question and answers? If there's anything that jumps out at people or anything that we've gone over previously as far as the RBA movements, we'd love to sort of have a bit of a more of a panel discussion and a chat about it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. And just to just not close off per se, but again, I think it's just a reminder that we're all sometimes guilty of not asking for help. But if you actually ask the right expert about what you're trying to achieve, I'm sure there's a bunch of strategies and smart lending options that Sam described that none of us had heard of, or equally knew from a point of view what was possible. And for me, there's a whole bunch I just learnt there as well. So good on you, Sam. Well done. And we might just take that time. We do have a couple of slides to show the audience around some examples, case studies that Luke and Tristan have surfed for their clients. But we might just take a quick stock take and open up the floor for Q&A if there are those who do have a question. We'd love to hear from you.
Mate, I've just got a quick question for Sam because I'm genuinely interested by this. Obviously, pretty big news with the interest rates being reduced yesterday. If you're a buyer that's currently in the market and you have already got a pre-approval and you're out sort of house hunting, will those interest rates have sort of like a backlog effect where you could essentially just, pick up the phone to yourself and find out, is there a chance that I could actually borrow more? Or would someone need to go through like another pre-approval sort of scenario in order for that to increase and get some different lending?
Tristan, mate, great question. Really topical. Good news is it will all be automatically applied to a certain extent. So certainly for the backbook customers, it'll just update. As I said earlier, on the 28th or about the 4th of March seems to be the big 2 days across multiple lenders. But if you've got an existing pre-approval, you won't have to go through the whole application process again. You can engage your broker to rerun the numbers based on the rates now, and that will give you a clear indication of what you'll be able to buy or how much your lending will increase when the rates come down. So knowing if you're at CBA, their interest rate cut is coming in, I think on the 28th of March, for example. So that means as long as your pre-approval extends beyond that, on the 28th, you'll be able to access that extra $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, depending on your individual situation. But that's something that we would organise as a broker firm, of quickly updating the figures and resubmitting it to the lender with just the note of going, hey, we're going to increase things to this level because we're working off the lower rate. So no need for pay slips, no need to go over debts again, no need to go over expenses. Just one email from us and we can have that pre-approval reissued at the higher amount to, again, just get them that next step further, or to be able to secure that right property that they might have missed out on once or twice.
So if you go into auction this Saturday, just call a broker and see what's
Just make
happening.
sure the finance clause is after the 28th and then you can get it
Yeah,
done.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Great question, Tristan. Anyone else in the call? And like as Tristan pointed out, like there might be some people here, in the market thinking about going to auction at the moment, or they've got their eye on some properties, or thinking about their own strategy. Like, and there's no such thing as a silly question. So feel free to ask Tristan, Sam, Luke, any question you like. All right. Well, if we're not going to get a question yet, we might pivot to some of our final slides. But as we've mentioned, if you do have questions you don't feel comfortable asking them, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and we'll go through them one by one and answer them. All right. So case studies. So as we mentioned, it's not just about the asset, the yield, the growth. Yep, that's all important. But it's all about ensuring we understand, the risk appetite, the client profile, so we can establish a strategy that is meaningful and tailored to you. And Luke, it'd be great to hear from you. I know you've got a particular client who's a first-time investor that you helped recently. It'd be great to get some context about them, who they were, what they were trying to achieve, the strategy put in place, and ultimately the outcome.
Yep. Thank you, Tom. So these particular investors, they were chopping at the bit to get in the market and build a portfolio. They only had limited funds to buy their first investment. So this was going back to what I was saying before about when we consider a investment, or we talk about a strategy for an investor, looking at budget, yield, strategy, and risk profile. So they had a limited budget in mind. They had a strategy where they wanted to get into the market and build equity to build a portfolio and eventually their forever home. And then also, but the consideration there was risk profile, because their budget was only around 300,000. So that limited to the options they could buy in Australia. So for us, it was making them aware of the risks associated and define the best performing market for that price point. So to give you an idea, these days, fast forward to 25, your really starting point regionally or interstate for a purchase would be around 450,000. Back in 22 was it was around 300, 350. We always look at areas that you have power in numbers, a good economy, and good metrics. When you're looking at a lower price point, there's consideration around demographics, average household income, which would also bring on a lower pool of tenants. So for this particular purchase, it was in Elizabeth Downs, so it's an area you would invest in. You wouldn't tell your friends. A good comparison in Melbourne would be a Glenroy or a Sunshine 10 years ago. So we bought for them in 22. The rental yield was about 5.5%. The valuation today is 575. So in the space of 32 months, they were able to generate about 277 grand in equity, which is about 48% growth, which is almost doubled in that period of time. So it was a great springboard for them, and they're now looking at buying their next purchase.
Well done, Luke. 18% year on year is a phenomenal outcome. And then Sam, if we go back to you, and not to put you in the spot, but debt recycling, as you framed it up, there's 277 grand there from an equity point of view. Now, how much that funds of the potential next investment, who knows? But you look at that number, and then what's sort of the strategies that you're thinking about for, as Luke just has mentioned, they're looking for the next investment. What's the most appropriate strategy you'd be talking about from a finance point of view to maximise that tax strategy?
Mate, so straight away, as you said, the purchase for the 295, they would have to be, at most at a 95% lend. That's just how things are. So we're looking at 280K being their base loan amount at its peak. With that 277, they should be able to comfortably pull out at least 100 maybe a bit more to bring it back up to 80%. That's a sizable deposit on the next home. They should therefore be able to have that as a deductible portion. And then if they go and buy another $300,000 property, or maybe they're looking at in a bit higher range this time because there's better rental yields, but lower capital growth, again, that's something that the buyer's advocate wizards will be able to help them with. It allow them to go and seek either, higher rental yields and therefore maximize lending in that sense, or again, they can basically rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Often you find that buyers will sort of go and try and do the same thing a second time. So pulling out 100K for the next deposit if they didn't have savings of their own, or maybe they did have 50,000 in savings, and purchasing the next place, they can still offset their non-deductible debt while still leveraging that asset. So what they're doing is they're paying down at a quicker rate the debt that they can't deduct while
Yep.
leveraging that same asset to go and buy the next investment property that would hopefully experience a similar level of growth, or
Yeah.
even if it was only 10% year on year, a considerable amount. And then they've created a purchasing cycle for themselves where they can build that property portfolio. Every couple of years, they're adding another asset and another asset.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Well done. And thank you, Luke. And Tristan, tell us about Rachel and Ben.
Yeah, of course. I will actually just answer a quick question. Steffi, I know that you sent me a direct message, so I'm not too sure if Tom, you're able to see that. But
No.
for everyone else, Steffi just asked me, what does it mean Melbourne being 40% cheaper than Sydney? Because you didn't understand that well, and that's my fault. I apologize for not explaining that clearer. So just what that means as a whole generally is that's comparing the median house price between both cities, but it's comparing their metropolitan markets as well. So if you looked at Sydney as a whole and you took their median house price and then you looked at Melbourne as a whole from both of our capital cities and compared both of our median house prices towards one another, what we'll find is that as a generalization, Melbourne is 40% cheaper than from our median house price as opposed to what Sydney is. So if Sydney's at $1 million for their house price, which they're not, they're at like 3 mil, but we would be at 600,000 just for the easy sake of maths. So that's what that means, that essentially the difference between Melbourne and Sydney's house prices is getting further apart, and it's actually been growing the separation between the prices for both capital cities. So hopefully that makes sense. But feel free to message me or send me any other messages if you want me to explain that again. Yeah. Now, so for Rachel and Ben, so I think these are always just such an interesting case study for me. Because specifically we achieved some pretty good growth for them in a negative market, which I always find is very interesting. And I think it is pretty topical about what I said earlier, that it's not always that the entire market as a whole just performs at one speed. Like there is markets within markets, which is just probably the biggest takeaway for when we're looking at places like Victoria or Melbourne. And also from like a financing strategy. So Rachel and Ben used the Super Saver scheme, which I know is not a completely common scheme, but they used that to help essentially save up for their deposit. And we bought them an off-market property in Glen Iris for $1,008,000 about 18 months ago. And then we got lucky with that purchase. Like in all honesty, we were purchasing something that very much needed renovations. Literally the garage roof had caved in. But it was also just a really unique property in the essence that it was in a complex, but it had street facing on one of the best streets in Glen Iris. And it had a significantly larger parcel of land as opposed to pretty much all other units in this property type and price point. So I think we were able to purchase at a really, really good level on the way in, which allowed them to spend a little bit more money on the renovations than they thought they were going to be able to spend. So we bought that for $1,008,000. They spent circa $180,000 in renovations in the 3 months from settlement, and then moved into the home, and they've been living there as first home buyers since. And they called me a couple of weeks ago to say that they've just had someone that's come through their property off market from the agents that we bought it off that has just made an offer on their place for 1.8 million, and they've just accepted that offer. Which is just a huge number, considering that they were all in for 1.25, including stamps. and now they've just sold that for 1.8 million 18 months later. And we're helping them at the moment to source another property before that settles, where they're planning to do the exact same thing, which just shows that there is opportunities in these marketplaces when we sort of consider it as you're buying a problem, and then you're providing the solution, and then you're selling to the market something that is the done product that is the most highly desired asset that's out there.
Good point, Tristan. And like again, phenomenal outcome. And a reminder, EPR, capital growth benefits, and then how you can use that to your advantage and everything else in between. These opportunities do exist. How you identify them, people have different options available, but to get an outcome like that has well and truly positioned your clients to continue to build and build really well. So fantastic outcome. So Luke, were you going to jump in there, mate, with something? No?
I was going to add on to answer the question what Chris alluded to before, but though just on the point with the cost benefit of Sydney versus Melbourne, an interesting stat that why I looked at last year was the wage growth has actually outstripped growth in capital growth in Melbourne over the last 4 years. So from 2020 to March 2020 to October last year, the market as a whole dropped about 4.2%, but the wage growth actually grew 8.1%. So it's actually more affordable to own a home in Melbourne right now than it is in Brisbane and Adelaide and Hobart. So again, it's more so for home buyers, but and that's another reason why people keep coming back to Melbourne is the employment opportunities.
Yeah.
And we've got some big companies here that pay good money, and that's also it's you can get more for your money here currently than you can in any other city.
100%.
We can tie that into that exact point on the Super Saver scheme as well to cover us all off. For if you are in a good job on good money and you are making concessional contributions or through salary sacrifice, what the Super Saver scheme allows you to do is pull out up to $15,000 a year back from your additional contributions to super. So it's not just the amount that your employer pays on your behalf. It's actually additional amounts that you make either through salary sacrifice or perhaps non-concessional contributions. They can be withdrawn up to a max of $50,000 or $15,000 per year. So if you've made additional contributions of $10,000 for 5 years, you've only paid 15% on that instead of paying your standard tax rate. And then you pull out that $50,000 to go and put it into a home that's tax-free as well. So these people leveraged it. So they didn't pay tax on it going into super, pulled it out to buy their home, and then they converted that to a tax-free 550K profit in a span of 18 months. So again, leveraging those schemes is, there's severe benefit when done properly.
I will say that client was an accountant.
Oh, yeah, there you
go. So, yeah, I think they understood it very well. But yeah, mate, that's spot on.
Well, but the average person, and this isn't speaking down to anyone, it's just not their area of expertise. Just like I don't know the first thing about, being a window glazier or running a florist or whatever it may be that people do. You just don't know what you don't know. And finding that expert or having those conversations and making sure you're working with a team that will support you and be able to take a strong financial assessment of you and say, well, look, these are the things you want. Are you aware of this? Are you aware of why? And that's on the lending side. On the home buyer side, going, oh, well, look, I've heard that there's less tax payable in Adelaide. And you go, okay, well, what have you thought about buying in these regional areas in Victoria? Have you considered looking in, in the North Adelaide area because we're seeing great growth? Having that additional expertise, I think, can create some really great outcomes. And as we spoke about with the questions in the chat, at least as well, when you are working with your professionals, no such thing as a stupid question. If anything, it could stop a stupid mistake later on. And I think, Tristan, Luke, and Tom are the exact same as me, that we sort of love being engaged in that process. And chatting and educating and making sure that our clients are making informed decisions, because we want you at the end of the day to have ownership over what you do. not just go, oh, well, I'm not too sure about this, or I don't know how it works, but I'm going to do it anyways. It's all about building confidence, and making sure that people are there to support you to buy your next property.
Yeah, good point, Sam. And I deliberately get to this slide as Sam just mentioned. The experts, it's experts in the right, the right capability to help you, purchase and invest. And Alba and Low Market Razor, Lou, Tristan, and their respective businesses, we're all about uniting and creating a dedicated team behind you, the property investor, to make sure you're getting similar outcomes to what you've just seen, right? So, really, really important. You're speaking to an expert such as Sam, who will talk you through exactly what you can do, how we're going to do it, how we're going to structure your finances so you can maximize those benefits that have been on show, and then in conjunction with either Luke or Tristan to find that asset for you, and then we go again at the right time. Having a dedicated team behind you ensures you're maximizing those opportunities. And what you're seeing on that screen is your dedicated team. Okay. So really, really grateful for the level of support and expertise we have and that we have on offer for those just on the call. And equally, you might have some friends and family who are having conversations with you about thinking about investing, and clearly they could benefit from a conversation. And we do hope that you go away and share some of the insights that you've heard tonight. And equally, if people do need that support, feel free to introduce and share our details with them. But with that being said, we've got a couple of minutes left. Would love to hear any further Q&A from the audience. And as I can't reiterate or stress enough, there's no such thing as a silly question. So anyone have a question they'd like to ask anyone on the panel? We'll take the silence as no, and I am conscious we are getting into the evening, but I think for anyone that does have a question, what I would suggest is anything finance related, and we do encourage you to ensure you've got direct access to speak to an expert. And clearly, Sam is that expert you want to be speaking to. So if you're thinking about taking out a loan or not sure how to go about your finance, or equally you're motivated to buy and you don't know where to start, please reach out to Sam. We will follow up with all of you via email about our details and how you can be in touch. But Sam is definitely the first point of contact that we do encourage to have a conversation with. And then from there on in, as we start to think about where we're looking to buy or what that strategy looks like, between Luke and Tristan, we've got some experts available who are able to put a strategy in place to find that right asset. And that rounds out your team here through Razor and through Alba and through Luca Parley and Tristan at Tommy to help you on your property journey. We are smack bang on 7:30. I want to thank all of you for making the time to join us this evening. I want to give a special thanks to Luke, Sam, and Tristan for your time, your insight, and your expertise. A special shout out to Annie for all the work she's done behind the scenes to make this possible. And for those who have joined or you weren't sure what you're going to get out of it, we're committed to ensuring that all of our clients have got the right insights and resources to help them buy safe and easy and grow well through property. We'd love your feedback as to what you'd like to hear next, format, more examples, more topics, because it's all about you and making sure we, as your trusted partner, can support you on that journey. So we'd love to hear from you. Have a great evening. Thanks for your attendance, and we'll see you all soon.